The spacecraft descended through the thick, golden atmosphere of Escuril 7, creating ripples in the heavy clouds as it approached the forest moon's surface. Inside, students from various planets across the galaxy waited with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Mia, a young woman from Earth, gazed through the viewport at the alien landscape. Massive trees with bioluminescent vines, strange rock formations, and the occasional silhouette of an unknown creature moving through the dense foliage. "First time on a forest moon?" asked a gelatinous being seated next to her, its translucent body shimmering slightly as it spoke. Mia nodded, adjusting the old pair of glasses tucked safely in her jacket pocket, a family heirloom she carried everywhere. "Yes, though I've read about Escuril 7 in the Academy's planetary database." "I'm Plink," the gelatinous being introduced itself, extending what appeared to be a pseudopod. "From Zelfer." "Mia, from Earth," she replied, briefly touching the cool, jelly-like appendage. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp hiss from across the cabin. "If you're done with the pleasantries, some of us are trying to prepare mentally for the exam." The speaker was a reptilian humanoid with iridescent scales and powerful limbs. His name was Koresh, notorious among their year for his physical prowess and equally impressive arrogance. "Don't mind him," whispered a winged female perched on a specially designed seat that accommodated her feathered appendages. "I'm Nella, from Verith." Koresh thinks everything is a competition to be won through intimidation. Behind them, twin aquatic humanoids with silvery skin and webbed hands whispered to each other, their large eyes reflecting the dim light of the cabin. Ryle and Omi from Treelith, an ocean planet. They rarely separated and communicated through a combination of whispers and subtle movements that seemed almost telepathic to outsiders. The spacecraft shuddered as it made contact with the ground. The door hissed open, releasing a ramp that extended down to the mossy forest floor. Standing at the bottom was their professor, a tall, metallic-skinned being with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. Professor Drathery's reputation preceded him, known throughout the Galactic Academy for his rigorous survival courses and uncompromising standards. "Welcome to Escuril 7. His voice resonated without any apparent movement of his mouth. "Exit the craft and form a semicircle before me. Leave all electronic and technological devices aboard." The students exchanged nervous glances. "Everything?" asked Nella, her wings twitching anxiously. "Everything," confirmed Professor Drathery, his middle eye glowing slightly brighter. "This exam is called Primitive Survival for a reason. You will demonstrate your ability to thrive without the technology you've grown dependent on." Hesitantly, the students began removing devices, communication bands, environmental controllers, navigation implants, and various other personal technologies that had become extensions of themselves. Mia reluctantly placed her atmospheric analyzer on a designated shelf, but kept her glasses in her pocket. They weren't electronic, just bent metal and shaped glass. Outside, the air was thick with unfamiliar scents, sweet nectar mixed with earthy dampness and something vaguely reminiscent of cinnamon. Strange sounds echoed through the forest canopy, clicks, whistles, and occasional low rumbles that made the ground vibrate subtly. The Galactic Academy trains protectors, not conquerors. Professor Drathery began once they had assembled. "Many of you come from advanced civilizations where survival needs are met with the press of a button or thought command. But what happens when those systems fail? When you find yourself on an unknown world without your technology? That is what you will learn here." His 3 eyes swept across the group, studying each student carefully. "Your first challenge begins now. Before nightfall, each of you must create fire without using any modern tools or devices." A collective murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. "Fire," whispered Ryle to Omi. "We've never needed fire underwater." "Impossible without a thermal igniter," muttered Koresh, though loud enough for others to hear. Professor Drathery remained impassive. Throughout galactic history, the ability to create and control fire marked a significant evolutionary threshold for countless species. It provided warmth, protection, the ability to cook food, and ultimately led to technological development. Today, you rediscover this fundamental skill. With a sweeping gesture toward the forest, he concluded, "You may begin. I will observe, but not assist. You have until the primary sun touches the western mountains." The students dispersed into the forest, each seeking their own approach to the seemingly impossible task. Mia walked slowly, observing her surroundings with careful attention, the moisture levels, the types of vegetation, the direction of the breeze. She began gathering materials, dry leaves that crackled when crushed, thin branches from a conifer-like tree, a handful of fibrous material that resembled moss but was much drier to the touch. Meanwhile, Koresh had found 2 stones and was striking them together with increasing frustration. Each attempt yielded nothing more than a dull click and growing abrasions on his scaled hands. "Primitive doesn't mean ineffective," he growled, throwing one of the stones away in disgust. Nella had taken a different approach. Hovering above the ground, she used her powerful wings to create gusts of wind against branches, hoping the friction might generate heat. But the forest was too humid, the wood too green, and her patience too thin. After 20 minutes of exhausting effort, she landed, panting and irritated. "This is absurd," she called out to no one in particular. Verthians evolved to use tools, not be tools. Plink was experimenting with his own body chemistry, attempting to catalyze a reaction that might generate heat. His translucent form had taken on a reddish tinge as he concentrated, but the external temperature remained unchanged. The twins, Ryle and Omi, looked completely lost. On Treelith, light came from bioluminescent organisms, not fire. They sat cross-legged on the ground, discussing theories but making no practical attempts. As the hours passed, frustration mounted. Koresh had managed to create a small spark by striking a mineral-rich stone against another, but couldn't sustain it long enough to ignite anything. His hands were now scraped and bleeding, his pride wounded even more deeply. Nella had abandoned her wind method and was now trying to use a curved piece of bark to focus the sunlight, having observed how the droplets of water on leaves sometimes created intense points of heat. But without precision, her efforts were futile. Mia had been working silently all this time. She had arranged her collected materials in a small clearing, a nest of the driest fibers at the center, surrounded by progressively larger twigs and branches. She had dug a shallow pit and lined it with stones to create a fire ring. Now, she reached into her pocket and withdrew her glasses. Carefully, she angled one lens to catch the sunlight streaming through a gap in the canopy. She focused the magnified beam onto the nest of dry fibers. With practiced precision, she held the position steady, squinting as she concentrated. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the tinder nest. Mia leaned down, gently blowing on the hot spot. The smoke thickened, and then a small flame flickered to life. She carefully added more fibers, then the smallest twigs, nurturing the infant flame with patience and care until it grew strong enough to consume larger pieces of wood. Within minutes, Mia had a small but steady fire burning in her stone ring. The crackling sound and the scent of burning wood drew the attention of the other students, who gathered around in disbelief. "How did you do that?" asked Plink, his body pulsing with curiosity. Before Mia could answer, Koresh stormed forward. "She cheated," he accused, pointing at the glasses in her hand. "Those are technology." "Actually," Mia responded quietly, "these are just shaped pieces of glass in a metal frame. They're completely passive objects, no electronics, no power source. Humans have been making them for over 1,000 years, long before we had what you'd consider technology." "But that's just using a tool," Nella protested, her wings fluttering in agitation. "How is that different from using a fire starter?" "The professor said no modern tools," Mia pointed out. "Glasses aren't modern. They're ancient technology, if you can even call them technology at all. They just focus light that's already there." Koresh wasn't satisfied. "It's still not creating fire from nothing, like we're supposed to." "No one creates fire from nothing," Mia replied, her voice remaining calm despite the accusation. Fire requires fuel, oxygen, and heat. I just found a way to concentrate the heat that was already available. From behind them came Professor Drathery's resonant voice. Correct. The three-eyed alien had been observing unnoticed. Throughout the galaxy, survival has never been about reinventing solutions. It's about using available resources intelligently. He stepped closer to the fire, the flames reflecting in his metallic skin. Some of you expected to create fire using only your bodies and random objects. But true survival intelligence means understanding basic principles and applying them creatively. Koresh's scales darkened in what might have been the reptilian equivalent of a blush. Nella looked away, her earlier criticism suddenly seeming petty. Maintain your fire, Professor Drathery instructed Mia. As for the rest of you, observe, learn, adapt. Night falls quickly on Escuril 7, and with it come temperatures that none of you are evolved to withstand without shelter or heat. As the professor walked away, the students regarded Mia's fire with newfound appreciation, and in Koresh's case, thinly veiled envy. Plink moved closer, asking Mia to explain the principles of focusing light. The twins watched with fascination as she demonstrated how the curved glass concentrated the sun's rays. Even Nella eventually approached, though her pride made her conversation stilted. On Varith, we don't need fire. Our cities float above the clouds where the sun always shines. On Earth, we don't need it either, not in daily life, Mia responded. But understanding how to create it connects us to our ancestors who did need it to survive. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. Only Koresh remained apart, nursing both his injured hands and his wounded pride as the alien forest began to darken around them. The night on Escuril 7 fell quickly, transforming the golden atmosphere into a deep indigo blanket studded with unfamiliar stars and 3 small moons. The temperature dropped precipitously, and the strange sounds of the forest intensified. Bioluminescent fungi began to glow along tree trunks, casting an eerie blue-green light across the clearing where the students had gathered around Mia's fire. Professor Drathery appeared as the last light of day faded, his metallic skin almost invisible in the darkness except when firelight caught it. Tomorrow's challenge awaits you. Shelter construction. Each of you must build a dwelling capable of protecting you from Escuril's elements: rain, wind, and indigenous fauna. I suggest you rest while you can. With that cryptic warning, he seemed to melt into the darkness, leaving the students to share Mia's fire and contemplate tomorrow's task. Morning came with a burst of crimson light as Escuril's primary sun breached the horizon. Dew clung to every surface, and a fine mist hung between the massive trees. Professor Drathery was already waiting when the students stirred. Today you will build your shelters, he announced. By nightfall, each of you must have constructed a dwelling that will protect you from the elements. Escuril 7 experiences heavy rainfall, thick fog, and is home to various predators. Your shelter must provide adequate protection from all these factors. Nella's wings shuddered at the mention of rain. Feathers and dampness didn't mix well. Koresh seemed more confident about this challenge, his reptilian heritage giving him natural skill with structural engineering. The twins exchanged worried glances. On their ocean world, shelter meant something entirely different. Begin now, Professor Drathery instructed. I will evaluate your dwellings at sunset. The students dispersed, each seeking appropriate locations and materials. Mia walked methodically through the forest, examining different areas before selecting a spot between the massive roots of a tree that created a natural recess. She began gathering long, flexible branches for the frame and broad leaves for waterproofing. Koresh chose a sunny clearing and began digging into the soft earth, planning to create a semi-subterranean den reinforced with mud and branches, a cocoon, as he called it, reminiscent of the breeding chambers on his home planet. Nella, true to her aerial nature, selected a high branch and began constructing a nest-like structure, weaving flexible vines together to create a platform. Her winged anatomy made climbing easy, but the fine manipulation required for tight weaving proved challenging for her talon-like hands. The twins, Ryle and Omi, gravitated toward a shallow stream. They began creating a semi-submerged dwelling, using stones and mud to form walls that rose just above the waterline, mimicking the partially submerged habitats of their homeworld. However, they soon discovered that the forest mud behaved differently from ocean sediment, crumbling instead of holding form. Plink's approach was perhaps the most unusual. Using his malleable body as a template, he created a dome-shaped depression in soft ground, then reinforced it with a latticework of sticks and leaves. His gelatinous body could conform to any space, but he understood the need for a stable structure that would maintain its integrity without his presence. As the day progressed, so did the structures, some more successfully than others. Mia's shelter took shape between the tree roots, a sturdy A-frame covered with overlapping leaves that shed water like shingles. She had dug a small drainage trench around the perimeter and raised the floor with dry materials to keep it above any potential water level. Koresh's cocoon looked impressive from the outside, a dome of packed mud reinforced with branches. But inside, it was damp and poorly ventilated, with no provision for smoke to escape if you wanted fire. Nella's aerial nest was aesthetically pleasing but structurally unsound, swaying precariously with each gust of wind. She had focused on creating a beautiful space, but neglected basic structural integrity. The twins had abandoned their first attempt at a semi-aquatic dwelling and were now building a more conventional structure on the bank, though they still incorporated elements that reflected their ocean heritage. Channels for water flow and transparent windows made from stretched plant membranes that resembled the air bubbles they used for viewing on Treelith. Plink's shelter resembled a honeycomb, with multiple small chambers that served different functions, one for sleeping, one for storing materials, one left open to the sky for observing stars. His analytical mind had considered multiple scenarios and planned accordingly. Throughout the day, Mia worked quietly, occasionally pausing to observe the others' progress. When she noticed Plink struggling to secure the top of his structure, she demonstrated a simple cross-bracing technique she'd learned during earth camping trips. When the twins couldn't figure out how to create a waterproof covering, she showed them how to layer leaves to direct water flow away from the interior. Only Koresh refused any assistance, working stubbornly alone, even when it became obvious that his shelter had serious flaws. His hands, still injured from yesterday's fire-making attempts, slowed his progress, but his pride prevented him from acknowledging the disability. As sunset approached, Professor Drathery began his inspection tour. He moved from shelter to shelter, testing structural integrity with a firm push, examining water management systems, and even throwing handfuls of forest debris against the walls to simulate wind-driven rain. Nella's aerial nest failed spectacularly under testing, collapsing when the professor merely touched its supporting branch. Beauty without function is merely decoration, he commented as Nella's feathers drooped in disappointment. Koresh's cocoon held up to physical pressure but failed the habitability test when Professor Drathery pointed out the lack of ventilation. A shelter that suffocates its occupant is not a shelter but a tomb, was his assessment. The twin structure showed promise but lacked crucial weatherproofing. Innovative water channels, the professor noted, but they direct water into your sleeping area rather than away from it. Plink's honeycomb design earned a thoughtful nod. Adaptive and multifunctional. However, the materials will rot quickly in this environment without proper treatment. When he reached Mia's shelter, Professor Drathery spent the longest time examining it, testing every aspect from the drainage system to the leaf-shingled roof. Finally, he stepped back. Practical knowledge applied with understanding of the environment. This structure would serve you well for an extended period. The evaluation complete, Professor Drathery addressed the group. Tonight, you will sleep in the shelters you have built. This is the true test of your work, not my assessment, but the reality of a night on Escuril 7. As darkness fell once again, the students retreated to their respective dwellings. A light rain began shortly after nightfall, revealing the strengths and weaknesses of each construction even more clearly than the professor's tests. Mia lay in her dry shelter, listening to the rhythmic pattering on the leaf roof. Occasionally, she heard frustrated exclamations from the others as they discovered leaks or structural weaknesses. Nella had abandoned her collapsed nest and sought refuge under a large tree fungus. Koresh remained in his cocoon despite the poor air circulation, too proud to admit defeat. The twins had moved their sleeping mats to the driest corner of their shelter, huddling together for warmth. Plink had simply transformed his body to create an additional waterproof layer inside his honeycomb, adapting as was his nature. As the night deepened, strange sounds emerged from the forest, calls and movements that suggested large creatures were active in the darkness. Mia felt a mixture of apprehension and confidence. Her shelter was solid, but the unknown environment kept her alert. She clutched her glasses, the tool that had given her an unexpected advantage, and wondered what tomorrow's challenge would bring. The third morning broke with heavy mist clinging to the forest floor, obscuring visibility beyond a few meters. The students emerged from their shelters in varying states of rest. Mia relatively refreshed, the twins damp but cheerful, Plink seemingly unchanged. Nella appeared disheveled, her feathers rumpled from a night under the fungus. Koresh emerged last, his scales dull from poor sleep in the stuffy cocoon, his mood even more sour than usual. Professor Drathery materialized from the mist like an apparition. Your third challenge concerns a fundamental aspect of survival, sustenance. Today, you will forage for food from the forest. You must determine which fruits are edible, which insects are non-toxic, which roots can be cooked and consumed. He gestured broadly at the surrounding forest. Survival requires not just shelter and warmth, but energy to maintain them. You must nourish yourselves using only what the environment provides. With these instructions, the professor once again receded into the forest, leaving the students to face their new challenge. Koresh, determined to redeem himself after 2 days of perceived failure, immediately announced his intention to hunt. Gathering berries and roots is for the weak, he declared. A true survivor provides meat. Without waiting for a response, he stalked off into the forest, eyes scanning for movement. Nella decided to focus on fruit and aerial foods, using her flight ability to reach high branches where colorful pods and berries grew in abundance. She harvested indiscriminately, collecting anything that looked remotely appetizing without considering toxicity. The twins, Ryle and Omi, naturally gravitated toward the stream, searching for aquatic plants and possibly small water creatures. Their experience with ocean vegetation gave them some advantage in identifying potentially edible water plants, though the freshwater ecosystem was significantly different from their saltwater home. Plink adopted a scientific approach, systematically testing small samples of various substances by absorbing them into specialized parts of his gelatinous body, which could analyze chemical compositions. His method was slow but methodical, gradually building a catalog of safe versus toxic options. Mia began by observing the forest inhabitants, small flying creatures similar to birds, six-legged mammals, and insects. She watched what they ate, noting which fruits and leaves attracted which species. After gathering a small collection of plants that seemed popular with the local fauna, she returned to her shelter and rekindled her fire. By midday, each student had amassed their own collection of potential food sources. Koresh returned dragging a large lizard-like creature he had managed to corner and overpower after an exhausting chase. His pride was evident despite his exhaustion, but the creature's tough hide and strange anatomy presented new challenges for preparation. Nella had collected an impressive variety of colorful fruits and berries, arranging them in an aesthetically pleasing display. However, after confidently sampling several varieties, she began experiencing dizziness and nausea, clear signs of mild poisoning from an improperly identified fruit. The twins had harvested various aquatic plants and roots, but were uncertain how to prepare them. Raw, they were tough and bitter, nearly inedible. They watched enviously as Mia tended her fire, realizing that cooking might be the solution to their problem. Plink had successfully identified several safe food sources, including a fungus that contained sugars compatible with his metabolism. His body had begun to emit a faint glow as he absorbed these nutrients, a sign of successful energy conversion. Mia worked quietly by her fire, where she had set up a stone platform for cooking and a hollowed piece of bark filled with water as a makeshift pot. Into this, she placed selected leaves and flowers to create an herbal tea. She also roasted several roots and tubers she'd identified as safe based on her observations and earth camping knowledge. The aroma of Mia's cooking drew the others, including a reluctant Koresh who was struggling to butcher his catch with only a sharp stone as a tool. The scent of roasting roots and herbal tea was especially appealing after 2 days of minimal nutrition. Nella approached first, her wings drooping slightly as she fought against the effects of the toxic berries she consumed. Those smell remarkable, she admitted, her earlier standoffishness tempered by physical discomfort. Mia looked up, immediately noticing Nella's pallor and trembling. "You've eaten something toxic," she observed. "This tea might help. It has detoxifying properties, at least it would on Earth, and the plants here share some characteristics." Initially hesitant, Nella's discomfort overcame her pride, and she accepted the offered bark cup. The warm liquid provided almost immediate relief, settling her stomach and clearing her head. "How did you know which plants were safe?" she asked, genuine curiosity replacing her usual haughtiness. "Observation and testing," Mia explained. "I watched what the local animals ate, then tested small amounts on my skin before tasting tiny bits. If there was no reaction, I tried cooking them, which often neutralizes toxins." As they talked, the twins approached with their collection of aquatic plants. "Could we?" "Possibly." They began in their synchronized way. Mia nodded, making room by her fire. "Boiling might help with these," she suggested, recognizing the starchy nature of their roots. "They look similar to taro from Earth, which is toxic raw but nutritious when cooked." Koresh watched this interaction from a distance, struggling with his lizard carcass. The meat was tough and gamey, with a strong odor that was becoming increasingly unappetizing as he worked. His hands, still sore from the fire-making attempts, made the task even more difficult. Mia noticed his struggle, but didn't offer help directly, knowing his pride would cause him to reject it. Instead, she commented, generally, that hide would make good material for water collection or storage, and the meat would be less tough if it's cooked slowly over a low flame. Koresh pretended not to hear, but after several more minutes of frustration, he grudgingly approached the fire. "I suppose cooking is the logical next step," he stated, as if it had been his plan all along. As the afternoon progressed, an unexpected sense of community developed around Mia's fire. The twins successfully boiled their aquatic roots, creating a starchy paste that tasted surprisingly good. Nella recovered from her poisoning and began sorting her fruit collection with Mia's guidance, separating toxic varieties from safe ones. Plink shared his findings about local fungi, identifying several nutritious varieties that the others could safely consume. Even Koresh eventually joined the collaborative effort, though reluctantly at first. The fire-roasted lizard meat, seasoned with aromatic leaves Mia had identified, proved tastier than anyone expected. His hunting skills, combined with the group's collective cooking knowledge, had produced a substantial meal. As evening approached, Professor Drathery appeared to evaluate their progress. He observed the shared meal without comment, sampling each offering with his unusual metabolism that could process almost anything without harm. When he tasted Mia's herbal tea, a slight nod was his only visible reaction, but in the context of his usual impassivity, it was high praise. The lizard meat earned a thoughtful tilt of his head, acknowledging Koresh's contribution. The twins' root paste and Plink's fungal discoveries each received their own subtle signs of approval. After completing his evaluation, Professor Drathery addressed the group. "Nourishment is about more than mere consumption. It is about understanding your environment, recognizing patterns, testing safely, and ultimately sharing knowledge." His 3 eyes swept over the gathered students. Some of you approach this challenge as individuals. Others recognize the value of observation and collaboration. Both approaches have merit in different situations. As the professor departed once more, the students continued their meal in contemplative silence, each reflecting on how their perspective had shifted over the past 3 days. The competitive atmosphere had gradually transformed into something more cooperative, even Koresh finding himself reluctantly appreciating the benefits of shared knowledge. That night, as they retired to their improved shelters, several students had made modifications based on Mia's design principles. A new sense of community had begun to emerge. The strange sounds of the forest seemed less threatening when faced with collective resilience rather than individual struggle. The fourth morning arrived with unexpected clarity. The mist had lifted, and Esquirrel's primary sun cast dappled light through the forest canopy. The students gathered automatically around the central clearing where Mia's fire, banked from the previous night, still smoldered gently. They expected Professor Drathery to appear with their next challenge, perhaps something even more demanding than the previous 3. Instead, when he materialized from between the massive tree trunks, his announcement caught everyone by surprise. "The examination is complete," he stated without preamble. Confused murmurs swept through the group. "Complete," echoed Nella. "But we thought it would last at least a week." "Many trials do," confirmed the professor. "But the purpose of this examination was not to exhaust you with endless tasks. It was to reveal fundamental truths about survival, adaptation, and the nature of intelligence itself." His 3 eyes studied each student in turn. "You have demonstrated your capabilities and limitations. You have faced challenges without your technological advantages and found solutions using only your minds, bodies, and the natural world around you." Professor Drathery gestured for them to sit, and the students arranged themselves in a semicircle, anticipating his explanation. "The Galactic Academy trains protectors, not conquerors," he began, echoing his words from the first day. "Understanding primitive survival methods is not merely a historical curiosity or an emergency contingency. It is a framework for understanding the fundamental relationship between intelligent life and environments." He pointed to the various shelters visible from their position. "Each of you approached these challenges differently, reflecting your biological heritage, cultural background, and personal temperament. Some relied on physical strength." His gaze rested briefly on Koresh, others on analytical observation. He nodded toward Plink, aerial advantage, to Nella, aquatic adaptation, to the twins, or accumulated knowledge, finally to Mia. But the most valuable lessons emerged when these different approaches began to merge and complement each other. Yesterday's meal represented more than mere nutrition. It demonstrated the power of collaborative survival, which is ultimately what has allowed various species to advance beyond mere existence to civilization. Koresh, who had been silently contemplating the professor's words, spoke up. "At first, I thought this examination was about proving individual superiority, about being the best survivor." He glanced at Mia, his reptilian features softening slightly. "I was wrong. It was about understanding that different strengths combine to create something more effective than any single approach." Professor Drathery's middle eye brightened slightly, the equivalent of a smile. "Precisely. And that, student Koresh, is a more important realization than any fire you could have built or shelter you could have constructed." Nella flexed their wings doubtfully. "On Verith, we value individual achievement above all else. Our flying skills, our artistic expressions, they're all personal accomplishments. But here, even I had to admit that I needed help." She looked at Mia. "Your tea probably saved me from a much worse poisoning." The twins spoke in their synchronized manner. "We come from a world where community is everything. No individual survives alone in the oceans of Trilith. But we still had to learn that cooperation extends beyond our own species, our own familiar environment." Plink's gelatinous body rippled with what might have been emotion. "My people value observation and experimentation. We believe that was enough. But observation without application has limited value, and experiments without shared results benefit no one. All eyes turned to Mia, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout the discussion. After a moment, she spoke. On Earth, we have a saying, knowledge is power. But that's incomplete. Knowledge shared is power multiplied. My glasses gave me an advantage with the fire, yes. But that advantage only became truly meaningful when everyone could benefit from the heat and light. Professor Drathery nodded, his metallic skin catching the morning sunlight. The greatest threat to intelligent life is not predators or hostile environments. It is the delusion that any being, any species, any civilization can thrive in isolation. The most advanced technology in the galaxy began with simple tools, like your glasses, Mia, and cooperative problem solving. He stood, signaling that his assessment was concluding. A ship will arrive shortly to return you to the Academy. But know this, you are not leaving Eyeglasses 7 the same as you arrived. You carry its lessons within you, not just about fire and shelter and food, but about the nature of collective resilience. True to his word, the distinctive hum of a spacecraft soon became audible, growing louder as it descended through the golden atmosphere. The students began gathering their few possessions, preparing to depart. As they waited for the ship to land, Koresh approached Mia, his movement hesitant, almost awkward. He extended his hand, a human gesture he had clearly practiced. I misjudged you, he said, the admission visibly difficult for him. And perhaps myself as well. Mia accepted his hand briefly. We all have different strengths. You saved us from hunger yesterday. A hint of his old pride returned to Koresh's posture, but it was tempered now with something new, respect, perhaps, or the beginning of humility. The ship touched down in a clearing near their camp, its ramp extending smoothly to the forest floor. One by one, the students boarded, first the twins, then Nella, then Plink, each pausing to take a final look at the alien force that had challenged and changed them. Koresh hesitated at the base of the ramp, then turned back to where Mia stood by the remains of her fire. From his belt, he removed a small object, a claw from the lizard creature he had hunted, now carefully polished and shaped into a primitive tool. He offered it without words, and Mia accepted it with equal silence, understanding the gesture's significance. Inside the ship, Professor Drathery waited in the central chamber. As the hatch sealed and the craft began its ascent, something unusual caught the students' attention. A small sphere of energy hovering in the center of the room, containing within it a tiny flame that burned without apparent fuel. A reminder, explained the professor, noting their curious expressions. Technology can replicate the light and heat of fire, but it cannot replicate the journey of discovery that led to its first. Kriesischen. That journey is what you will carry forward in your studies and, eventually, your roles as protectors of the galactic community. Mia placed her glasses carefully beside the floating flame, not discarding them, but acknowledging their place in the continuum of tools that extended from the most primitive to the most advanced. The simple curved lenses had demonstrated that sometimes the oldest solutions remained powerful, and the simplest technologies could still be vital when stripped of all else. As Eyeglasses 7 receded below them, its golden atmosphere glowing in the light of its primary sun, Mia gazed out at the stars becoming visible above. She carried with her not just the lizard claw from Koresh and her family's glasses, but something less tangible, an understanding that transcended the specific skills they had practiced. We return with yesterday's fire, she murmured, almost to herself, but just loud enough for the others to hear, preparing for greater challenges ahead. But now, each of us carries another flame within, the flame of understanding. Professor Drathery's 3 eyes closed briefly in acknowledgement, the closest he had come to expressing emotion throughout their time on the forest moon. The ship accelerated, carrying 6 students who had arrived as competitors but were departing as something closer to a team. Each changed in subtle but fundamental ways by their brief encounter with a more primitive existence. The floating flame continued to burn steadily in the center of the cabin, a physical manifestation of the metaphorical fire that now connected them. Just as their ancestors across different worlds had once gathered around flames for warmth, protection, and community, they now shared this symbolic hearth. A reminder that beneath the advanced technology and interstellar civilization lay the same basic needs and the same potential for cooperative innovation that had first propelled thinking beings toward the stars. As the ship entered hyperspace, Mia thought of how she would describe this experience in her academy journal. The irony wasn't lost on her. The most advanced educational institution in the galaxy had sent them to learn the most primitive skills imaginable. Yet nothing about the experience felt primitive in retrospect. There was wisdom in those fundamental challenges, a clarity that the complexity of technological life often obscured. She looked around at her fellow students, each lost in their own thoughts. Nella was preening her feathers back into order, but her movements lacked the usual vanity. There was purpose and care in her actions now. The twins were sketching something together, perhaps planning improvements to their water channeling system. Plink's translucent body had taken on a contemplative blue tinge as he observed the stars streaking past. Even Koresh sat quietly reflective, occasionally glancing at the floating flame with newfound respect. When we returned to the academy, Professor Drathery spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. You will resume your technological studies. You will again have access to quantum computers, molecular assemblers, and neural interfaces. But remember this moment. Remember what you accomplished with nothing but your minds and the raw materials of a forest moon. Professor, Nella asked, her voice lacking its usual impatience, why did you end the examination after only 3 challenges? Were there more planned? The professor's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture they had come to recognize as thoughtfulness. The examination continues for exactly as long as it needs to. For some groups, it takes weeks before the essential lesson emerges. Your cohort was unusually efficient. The essential lesson being cooperation? Plink inquired, his body rippling with curiosity. That, and something more, Professor Drathery replied. The recognition that technology is not separate from nature, but an extension of it. Your glasses, Mia. He gestured toward where they rested beside the floating flame. Are not fundamentally different from a bird's use of twigs to extract insects from bark, or a primate's use of stones to crack nuts. They are tools that amplify natural capabilities. Then what makes advanced technology different? Asked Koresh, his voice uncharacteristically reflective. Scale and complexity, not essence, the professor answered. The most sophisticated neural interface is, at its core, simply an extension of your natural senses and cognitive functions. The danger lies in forgetting this connection, in seeing technology as something alien to nature rather than derived from it. Mia nodded, understanding dawning. That's why this course is mandatory for all specializations at the academy. It's not just about emergency survival skills. It's about maintaining perspective on what technology really is. Precisely, Professor Drathery confirmed. The Galactic Academy produces the most advanced technological innovators in known space. But without this perspective, those innovations risk becoming disconnected from the beings they are meant to serve. The twins spoke in their synchronized way. On Treelith, we have a saying, the current that forgets the ocean becomes merely a puddle. An apt metaphor, the professor acknowledged. Technology that forgets its origins and purpose becomes merely an end unto itself. Impressive, perhaps, but ultimately hollow. As they continued their journey back to the academy, conversation flowed more naturally than it had before their time on Esquirrel 7. Barriers have been broken down, not just between individuals, but between different ways of seeing and interacting with the world. Nella described the aerial cities of Varith, where technology and biology had merged to create structures that grew and adapted like living organisms. Koresh reluctantly shared stories of his homeworld's harsh deserts, where his people had developed not just physical adaptations, but sophisticated water conservation technologies that mimicked reptilian biology. The twins explained the deep communication networks of Treelith's oceans, where information traveled through bioelectric currents much like their own thought patterns. Plink detailed how Zolfarian society had developed technologies that changed states like their own malleable bodies, flowing from one purpose to another as needed. Mia listened more than she spoke, absorbing these diverse perspectives. When she finally did share, it was about Earth's long and sometimes troubled relationship with technology, how her species had nearly destroyed their planet before learning to harmonize their innovations with natural systems. Perhaps that is why you succeeded with the fire challenge, Professor Drathry observed. Your species remembers both the power and the danger of technological development. Maybe, Mia acknowledged. Or maybe I just happened to have the right tool at the right time. A tool is only as valuable as the mind that wields it, the professor countered. Many students before you have brought similar items, yet failed to apply them effectively. As they neared the academy, the massive space station coming into view through the viewport, Professor Drathry made one final observation. Your performance will be recorded as exemplary. But the true measure of your success will be how you apply these lessons in your future work. The spacecraft docked with a gentle shudder, reconnecting them to the technological marvel that was the Galactic Academy. As the boarding ramp extended, the familiar hum of advanced systems surrounded them. Climate control, artificial gravity modulators, ambient intelligence networks, all working seamlessly to create an optimal environment. Before disembarking, Professor Drathry addressed them one last time. The floating flame will remain in the ship's chamber, but I suggest you carry its meaning with you. He looked at each student in turn. Remember, intelligence created fire long before it created starships. The principles remain the same. Observe, understand, adapt, share. This is the true foundation of all technological advancement. As they filed out, Mia was the last to leave. She paused beside the professor, looking back at the floating flame and her glasses beside it. After a moment's hesitation, she retrieved her glasses and placed them back in her pocket. A wise choice, Professor Drathry commented. Some tools are worth keeping close. Mia nodded. Not because they're advanced or powerful, she said, but because they remind us of what's fundamental. The professor's middle eye brightened in approval. You will do well at the academy, student Mia. Perhaps someday you will lead expeditions of your own to Escural 7 or similar environments. I'd like that, she replied, though I think I'll bring more than just glasses next time. Bring what you wish, Professor Drathry said, but never forget what you can accomplish without it. With a final glance at the floating flame, Mia stepped onto the boarding ramp and back into the technological wonder of the academy. The challenges of Escural 7 were behind her, but the lessons of simplicity, observation, adaptation, and cooperation would remain with her through all her future studies. They were, after all, the foundation upon which all of civilization's greatest achievements have been built, from the first controlled fire to the most advanced interstellar civilization. As she rejoined her classmates in the Academy's vast concourse, surrounded once again by holographic displays, quantum computers, and the countless technological marvels they had temporarily abandoned, Mia felt a new appreciation for the path that had led countless species from primitive survival to the stars. The journey had not been one of abandoning the old ways for the new, but of building upon fundamental principles that remained as relevant in the space age as they had been. When her ancestors first focused sunlight through curved glass to ignite the spark of flame,